name is Masako. This summer, I worked with Shawhin Roudbari at the University of Colorado Boulder's Environmental Design Department. The title of my project is The Role of Discourse in Activism in Shaping Identity Within Engineering Education, Creating a Qualitative Sociological Framework. Like it or not, engineering is a political activity. Donna Riley is a professor of engineering education at Virginia Tech and is a prominent activist in the field of engineering. She is fighting to keep engineers relevant by promoting the liberal education of engineers. At this moment, she thinks that this ethos may be threatened by proposed changes to engineering accreditation standards. This quote is from a lecture that she presented at the American Society of Engineering Education's annual conference last June that dealt with ABET. ABET stands for the Accreditation Board for Engineering and Technology. So, what is the problem? The problem is that these proposed changes to engineering education have stirred debate among educators, students, and even professional societies about the implications for the future of engineering. Now, there are two main sides. ABET says that these changes have been streamlined from the previous criteria in order to make accreditation simpler and easier to measure, and in order to give institutions more autonomy over their programs. The opposition, however, believes that there are essential changes, things that are lost in these new criteria, and that programs may not commit to such high standards if they don't have to. Now, how does this debate situate historically? In the 1960s, Wisnowski looked at the movement of engineers post-World War II, where they were faced with a crisis of identity, trying to understand their role between society, war, work, sustainability, and other big questions. Now, this research project has been very exploratory in nature. Sociologists have studied activism and social movements, and what I'm attempting to do is apply that lens to the field of engineering education. Our first research goal is to better understand the mediums through which activism occurs in the field of engineering. Our second is to understand the role of activist discourse in professional identity formation. Now you may ask, what is discourse? Discourse is the accumulation of conversations, from the informal, speaking with family members at the dinner table, to coworkers chatting on the job, to speeches at conferences and global meetings. And what it does is it looks at the language that is used, which shapes these conversations, and also has tangible effects on the issues at hand. So, how do you study this? Our main method was qualitative content analysis, which means we are taking text and tagging it for different ideas and concepts, and attempting to find patterns that emerge from the data, so that ultimately we can create a theory about how activist discourse is used to mobilize change in the field of engineering. So for our research goals, for research goal 1, tracking discourse, we're looking at social media, tweets, Facebook posts, conference proceedings, letters. Research goal number 2, we're looking at mobilization, hashtags, Facebook groups, websites. These are examples of the formalization of activist discourse, the organized initiatives which stem from these conversations in the discourse. Now, here are some examples of what we look at and what we do. Here we have a tweet. As you can see, I'm marking it up, looking at different aspects, including the language, who's tweeting, retweets or likes, signs of support, when and where it is occurring. have a Facebook group called Against ABET, spreading awareness about the issue and posting different content related to opposition to the ABET changes. Here we have an excerpt from an essay written by a former engineering student about how the ABET criteria influenced her education and her identity as an engineer. Now, what happens with all of these documents and everything we mark up? Seems almost endless. So how do we systematize the data? Well, these tags, which we call codes, we begin to brainstorm, and when we see patterns forming, relationships coming about, they turn into categories. These categories and codes are part of what Saldana calls your 3 levels of coding scheme analysis. At the bottom, you have your codes. These are the smallest ideas that you're marking up through text. The relationships that they show and the ideas that emerge become categories, 2nd level. Now, we didn't, in this project, get to themes yet. Themes are the highest abstraction and the most generalized ideas of the data, which is the next step. Here we have some examples of categories and codes. Codes, we have things such as feedback, urgency, social responsibility, frustration. For categories, we have institutionalization, controversy, and identity. Now, here is an example of a document where we're applying the more formalized coding scheme. It's a little bit less marked up than some of the other examples I've shown because at this point, you're attempting to focus and hone in on specific ideas and concepts as your themes emerge and you're beginning to write about an actual theory. Now, although we haven't formalized any themes, we do see some beginning to emerge. First, we see student interest in engineering. The quote from a student who was writing about ABET's personal impact on her: "These changes may limit the interest of engineering from students who are driven by the desire to make a difference in social and environmental contexts." Another theme we see is setting high standards versus giving engineering programs autonomy. From our favorite activist, Donna Riley, the proposed changes could lower expectations for engineering professionals, leading to a deprofessionalization of engineers, a loss in stature for the profession, and possibly a reduction in scope of engineers' responsibilities in the workplace and society. Future directions. These are some of the questions that are going to guide us moving forward in this research. Has social media changed the fundamental nature of activism in engineering? What does collaboration look like for an engineering industry? And how does activism fit into the professional culture of engineering? If there are any engineers in this room, I'd ask you to think about these questions. Think about how activism has affected your education and could affect your professional life moving forward. I'd like to thank the Leadership Alliance, Boulder, and Shawhin Roudbari, who's back there working with me on this project. And I would gladly like to answer any questions. So we are, I want to say, not evaluating the proposed changes. Rather, we're looking at how the debates represent how people see themselves, how people see engineering and its relationship to society. So Donna Riley, for example, believes that engineers should have a broad liberal education and that the standards set by ABET should include that, because she does not believe that programs on their own will meet those standards if they don't have to. That's one example. There are a few more, but I think that's probably the biggest one.
Could you give me some examples of maybe some of the activism that occurs within engineering and sort of like what social issues they're most concerned about addressing?
Right. So, so far this is the only case study that we've looked at in terms of activism in engineering. But there were forums convened around this specific issue. There were petitions written. There have been letters and essays written by students and professional societies towards ABET expressing their concerns over the changes. So these are some examples.
Could you give like more specific examples of what changes would happen from this?
Well, the thing is, a lot of the changes are kind of steeped in technical language, things moving around in the document. So we're less evaluating exactly what those changes would be because no one really knows. What people are really doing is they're speculating. And what we're looking at is what their speculations show about what they see engineering as a profession should be and how these changes could affect what it should be.
I was wondering if you could maybe impart a bit on the state of the literature, and does it parallel with what you've been finding so far? Because I know you sort of have some preliminary findings with the themes that young covers. So maybe you could speak on that bit.
Yeah, so with Wisnowski, he looked at specifically in the 60s and 70s, activism, and a lot of it was focused on people going to conferences, people writing in underground newsletters, zines, and pamphlets. And what we're trying to do is look at how does that seem in a contemporary sense. So that's why we wanted to especially include social media. What are people posting? How are they getting together? How are they reaching out using these tools to find specific target audiences?